big jump to talking to Shri Krishna. Thank you so much. Thank you for taking out time to talk to us and tell us about the book. What is the art of a happy exit?
Firstly, thank you, Shradha, for having me on here and making the time. It's good to see you. Just to clarify, I used to be the executive director, which meant much like an entrepreneur, I had my hand out all the time at any end trying to raise money. So some of these things don't change regardless of where we are. So the art of a happy exit actually had a start after I sold my first business. Again, you're running a business today. When we are running a business, we are just running in every possible direction, regardless of how well our business is doing. One of my earliest advisors, Praveen Madani, in fact, he's featured in this book very early on. My company had been open maybe for 2 years. We were still figuring out how to make revenue. And when I met him for some advice, the first question he asked me is, when are you going to sell your business? And I recall being so upset, coming home and telling my wife, I'm just not going to call this guy back again. I'm never going to meet this fella, right? But the reality was, of course, I went back to him repeatedly and we continued to be friends because I did not understand what he was talking about at that time, right? I mean, I was very much married to what I was doing, obviously figuring out how we're going to make money, what's going to happen next, etc. But much later, this is like most advice our parents give us. When they tell us, we roll our eyes and think, what do they know, right? The world's changed. This makes no sense. But then you eventually become a parent and then you become a little bit smart. So the art of a happy exit is much, if you look at the media today, right, and this has been true for many years, whether in the Valley or in Bangalore or in Boston, is we read stories about when people raise money. There's lots of excitement, right? But that, it's like getting married. It's the start. It's not the finish. We act as though it's the end of the movie. Similarly, when people sell their businesses, we read they sold for 45 million, they sold for 100 million, whatever the number is, jo bhi hai. 2 million, 10 million, 100 million, doesn't matter. And then obviously we all have this idea in our head, oh, that's what this is about. I never stopped to ask, are these people happy? First, it never occurred to me to ask, are these people happy? And I met one of the entrepreneurs who's featured in the book again as well. He ran his business almost for 18 years. He built it from ground up. He owned it 100%. More importantly, he planned for 5 years to sell the business. He sold the business for 45 million, all cash, no partners, no debt. Then he says, I spent the next 1 year being utterly miserable. So, this makes no sense. And if you tell people this, they sort of think, oh, you made your money. What are you unhappy about? Right? So the reality is, I think in entrepreneurship, just like we talk about starting up, growing, scaling, etc., but we don't really talk about what is an exit. Of course, every one of us, when the VCs ask us, what is your exit plan? We say things. I mean, this is just like when you tell people, if you have kids, your life will change. They say, yeah. But they have no clue how it's going to change. So the surprising thing when I talk to VCs, when I talk to lawyers, particularly people who do deals, many of them introduce me to this concept of seller's remorse, right? So, which is a double whammy, because let's say you sold your business. The world is thinking, oh, Shradha's amazing. She made a lot of money. They're probably even jealous of you. You can't turn around and say, I'm not happy.
Yeah.
Right? People are like, what's wrong with you? Right? In fact, that's the opening story I start with of a very nice entrepreneur. But anyway, we will talk about that. So this is really, how do you think ahead of, and many times selling a business is not about the money. It's really about what you want, what others want, maybe even what the buyers want. So that's really, I decided to take a look at this. And I know I learned a lot.
I want to ask you, what got you to write this book now? Like, what got you to write?
I was living in Bangalore, and like most entrepreneurs, in every morning I would go for a walk with one of my neighbors, and he's been an entrepreneur for many, many years. He's been an entrepreneur for a lot more time than I have been, and so he's seen from the time I had my idea, I started the business, and obviously every morning, like every entrepreneur, we talk about what's happening in our business. So he knew we were a loss-making firm. We died almost many, many times, etc. And here he was running a 45, 50 crore at that point manufacturing business. And I was running, $1 million business, which was not breaking even. And then we sold that business for $15 million. So he was like, what the hell are you doing? Right? So his perspective from outside. So his view initially was, how did this happen? I mean, and then he encouraged me, because I was blogging at this point. I was writing for the Hindu Business Line. So he said, why don't you tell your story? And the funny thing is, again, if you ask me when I sold my business, was I happy? I would tell you I was ecstatic, right? I realized, of course, with some distance. So if you look in this book, I did not interview anybody who sold a business less than 4 years ago, because you need that sort of distance, because whatever you're feeling in a same day, again, as an entrepreneur, you know this well, on one day, you can have 20 different feelings from every end of the spectrum, right? You're on top of the hill, you're at the bottom of the ocean, and everywhere in between at the same time. So this is the same thing that happens when you sell your business. So initially I started off saying, look, I should write the story of my business or my experience. And my wife can tell you, nobody's ever accused me of having a small ego, etc. But still, there was a doubt like, oh, everybody's writing about their story, so kya hai isme, right? Then as I started encountering other entrepreneurs who had raised money, so I had done some angel investing and I'd been a mentor, then you realize, wait a second, people aren't really sure uh, about what happens. They are not giving this any thought. Because the focus, again, like with raising money, many times the focus is on the amount of money you get when you sell your business, which is not really a good measure, because that's really, because the beauty is when you raise money or sell, money you can count. So we mistake that which we can count is the right thing, whereas that may not be the right measure. So this book was really kicked off. I mean, shout out to Ramani. Hey, thank you for asking me to do this. The book he wanted to write is not the book I wrote, but I think we are all better off with this book than just hearing my own story. Pieces of my story are in the book, but the whole idea, the other thing was, rather, the first 20 years of my life, I worked as an adult in Silicon Valley. Then I lived in Bangalore, worked there. Now I followed my children here. And one of the things that I had question struck me is this really different? Because living in Bangalore, I'll speak to Bangalore more than Chennai or Delhi, etc. We call ourselves, the Valley of India, etc. But really we aren't, right? So the thing is, are things different if you're an entrepreneur? And most of my life, I worked in tech. So I wanted to see, hey, is this true only for tech businesses or is this true for other businesses? So these three things: first, telling the story of what happens when people sell their businesses and why aren't they happy? Why is there a seller's remorse? The other part is there any difference between the Valley versus the Midwest? And, the first time I lived in the Midwest after I was age 50. And then you realize, wait a second, in California, I was an idiot. I thought I know what America is. And the reality is, California and Valley is very different. Again, it seems so self-evident now when I say it, when you live in the Midwest. So what are startups in the Midwest doing, and is that any different? And of course, even in India, you know this much better than I do, whether it's Chennai or Bangalore or Delhi, the mahal can be very, very different, right? The ambiance is very different of the entrepreneur network, which means what does that mean to sell? So that's the other part. And finally, I must thank my daughters, because as I was working on this book, they said, Papa, there aren't enough women entrepreneurs in this. What the hell's wrong with you, right? And it was quite hard to find women entrepreneurs who had exited 4 years or earlier, and more importantly, who were willing to speak to me as well. So many times they were very busy with their second startups or third startups. So while little more than the quarter of the people featured in the book are women entrepreneurs, they aren't really enough. That's what I'm going to work on next.
There are so many entrepreneurs who will be watching this, people watching this, and they'll have this question, oh, I want to exit. I don't even think about exit. And what would you like to tell all those entrepreneurs and to everyone, right? Like, and in India, of course, that we still don't have exit as part of our conversation. Investors talk about it, but entrepreneurs don't.
Excellent question. I think this is again, like all great truths, after you realize it, it seems self-evident. But I think one of the most important reasons I believe, right? And then I shared my story at the beginning. When people talk to me about an exit, I'd get upset because obviously I was enjoying the trip. I was just getting started. Or alternately, some days we were not sure we're going to live past this week. How are we going to pay salary this month? So what are you talking about an exit, right? But I realize now, the reason we should think about an exit is very, very simple. As an entrepreneur, every day you're stuck with the list of 50 things you need to get done, which keep you surviving or moving ahead. Or you've got this brand new idea, which even though the people around you don't believe yet, you think this is going to be the next big thing. So it's very easy that our entire mental space is caught up with all this. So it's very hard to get the view from outside. So the moment you say you're going to sell your business, you're obviously going to sell your business to somebody else. And then you realize, lo and behold, while you think your baby is amazing and this is the best thing since sliced bread, many times people outside are very skeptical. And, and this could be people who love you or people who love what you're doing. So the first, this was the third key insight that I garnered. That is planning to sell your business, even if you never intend to sell it, you intend to pass it on to your children and your grandchildren, is the best way to make sure you have an amazing business. Because what that makes you do is that makes you step outside and ask the hard questions that a buyer is going to ask.
Yeah.
and look at your business the way a buyer is going to look at. And then you realize, wait a second, this isn't quite what it is. Because when you build a business, again, we must all admit the truth. As entrepreneurs, we are very much tied in, and we love what we're doing. We're tied into our businesses, right? And we don't want someone else. And even if other people tell you your baby's ugly, you're going to ignore them and keep, otherwise you're not going to get up in the morning and go after it. But so this is not a question of are you pretty or ugly. The question is, can someone else come in tomorrow? If Shradha took 4 weeks off, will the business continue to run? Or are half the POs not to be signed and we don't know what to do and people will not take our phone calls? What will happen, right?
Yeah.
So everything from how dependent are you on the entrepreneur? A customer will come in and say, amazing, you're doing great, but you're so dependent on this one customer. What happens is when this one customer leaves? And you go like, no, that customer's never going to leave me. But you don't know that, right? So or you have a couple of amazing people working with you, and if they quit tomorrow, what happens? So there's a whole slew of things which obviously, see, to be a successful entrepreneur, obviously we need a healthy ego. So we obviously think we take care of these things. But the reality is none of this, right? Again, you are essentially naked when you look from outside. From inside, obviously you look good. So I think that's a very, very important thing. The second key reason, which is something that we don't talk much about, and I think because of the pandemic, we're beginning to talk about it more, which is the mental health of the entrepreneur. So what happens is in the early stage of your business, and we've seen even in large businesses, as it grows, the entrepreneur is still at the center of things, right? They love being at the center of things. People are running in. It's like in the movie, someone is coming in with some emergency or the other. You say, do this, do that. You're in the cockpit giving out orders. That's not very good for you. And if by now you're married or you have young children, whatever it is, all of that, right? So what's the point in being this successful entrepreneur, but you're no longer, your ex-wife or your ex-spouse hates you, your children don't want to see you, etc., right? So that issue of stepping back from your business. So when you have to sell your business, there's a clear possibility that you may not be part of the business going forward.
Yeah.
So these are things that are hard things for us to face upfront. So this is two key reasons. One, it is good for your business. So if you really care about your business, you would look at what does it take to sell it, not because you want to sell it, but you can look objectively at it and you can have other people go through it and say, hey, here are the issues you need to fix. The other part is, how do you stay healthy? Because part of your happiness, future happiness, is being laid right now as you invest into this. And the last part I want to talk about is, which again, all of us have been bad at this. Certainly I know I have, but I've had good people around me, which is there's media. And again, of course, your story is an exception, let's say for a second, but media tends to portray entrepreneurs as heroes. So it looks like Aggie Army, a single guy did it all. There's only Elon Musk or there is only Steve Jobs. The reality is, look, there's a cast of thousands, just like in the movies, right? So many people had this. What do those people want? So unless you look at selling your business, those are conversations you don't even have, both with yourself and with your team. So you need to think about, your company, your team, yourself, even if you never intend to sell your business. That is the reason you should read this book. Because again, anytime you read the story of other people, you at least learn what mistakes they're making.
What I'm hearing is that the art of happy exit is also about honest reflection. This book will get you to honestly reflect where you are and where you are heading.
Again, if you want to put this in a kernel, right? What I learned is that there are two parts to this. One is that's what I call the inner journey or the inner game. So when people talk about raising money or selling their business, they're really talking about the outer game.
Yeah.
Who are the prospective buyers? How will they negotiate with them? How much money is it likely to come? What happens after this? Am I going to relocate to San Diego? Or we are all focused on the external, because these are things that we think about negotiation, we think about price, etc. But the inner game, which is, what do I want? What do I really want? Again, as an entrepreneur, you can't go after the Himalayas, but I suggest you spend some time to think about this. Why am I doing this? What do I really want? Right. Second is, what does my team want? Because at the end of the day, the funny thing is, even if you do well, and if you think you feel initially that, oh look, my team should be grateful, they made lakhs of rupees or millions of dollars, whatever it is. But the reality is that what they wanted? And did we treat them well? Right? And what happens during the purchase, if you will, right? So one part is the inner game and the outer game. The other part is when you look at any transaction, right? We typically think of what happens after the transaction, and we think a lot about what happens during the transaction for a sale. Whereas rarely do we think, are we adequately prepared for this?
Yeah.
Because finally, if you think about interviewing for a job, you do a lot of preparation upfront,
Yeah.
right? And you visualize, okay, uske baad kya hoga? And then people tell you during the interview, make sure you're sitting up straight, make sure you make eye contact. So we recognize that there are three distinct phases. But when it comes to selling the business, we heavily focus on the middle piece. And of course, when we focus on money, we're focusing on what will happen afterwards. But many people don't think what will happen afterward. Matlab, am I going to stay in the business? Am I going to be happy being GM in a large business after having been king of my little hill? These are all things that people don't think about. Some people think,
Yeah.
okay, I'll go boating, I'll go golfing. How much golfing and how much boating can you do is what they find out later. Right? Or they think, okay, finally I'll take my wife and travel the world. But then you start another business, or all these things happen. So recognizing the interplay of these two things, the inner game and the outer game, as well as the before, during, and after. So what the book says is, hey, so the book has checklists at the end of each chapter, not every chapter, but every other chapter, where if you want, you could stop and say, okay, what is it that I want?
Did you have any surprises while you were writing this book in your research? And you have chosen some stories. Why those stories? What got you to choose those stories?
I think every journey we set out on, even when I set out to say someone else's story, you end up learning about yourself.
Yeah.
So I cited, for example, earlier when my daughter said, hey, there aren't enough women in your stories. I didn't say, oh, I don't want women in my stories, right? But you go with what's easy. I think this is true for us as entrepreneurs as well, right? I mean, I constantly tell my team and my students, be a lazy marketeer, as in, how much impact can we have with that? How little effort, right? There's a little bit of that. So to me, how hard it was to find women entrepreneurs who have exited at some distance and who are prepared to share their story. This is something that is still, especially as the father of two girls, two young women now. I mean, they aren't girls anymore. That's one part of it. But I think the biggest surprise for me, and it shouldn't be a surprise, but it was, is many of the people I interviewed, I did not meet firsthand, as in I did not know them prior to doing this research. Yet in the course of a 45-minute call, the degree of vulnerability that they were prepared to share and the extent to which they were sharing really surprised me. And, again, most of the book I did pre-pandemic. Obviously, during the pandemic, I did some refining, etc., and I had to go back to people. So it really gave me good hope and faith back in humanity and the manner in which people want to share, because it's not easy. Not every one of these stories. In fact, one of the gentlemen that I featured in the story, he's become a good friend now, R.T. Isaac, and he says, look, so his first feeling was, hey, my story is not a story of success. Maybe it's more a story of what you shouldn't do, right?
Yeah.
Which is, R.T. ran a business for 18 years. He'd been to Columbia Business School. So by every measure, he's been a successful business person with an immense pedigree. Yet, the word acqui-hire hadn't been invented back then when he sold his business. And after he sold his business, he still had debt. So he had to hold the debt and pay it off, etc. And he sold his business in less than 7 days. He decided, hey, Monday he was going to do it. By Friday, the business was sold, right? Yet he says, hey, I was one of the happiest people. So when you see the way people are able to, so to me, the two big things is the distance in 4 years. Every person I interviewed started off the interview by saying, I have no regrets. I mean, almost without fail. Not necessarily exactly those words, but that sentiment. But even in that short 45 minutes, they were able to immediately recall so many things that they would do differently. Right? What could they have done better? What would they have done differently, etc. And the third thing is assumptions that I had made, which is if you've been to Wharton Business School, if you had won, in fact, one of the stories I feature is this lady who went to Wharton Business School. She had worked for 11 years before she went to Wharton. She won the entrepreneur contest, the annual business plan contest at Wharton. That's the business she started, and she ran it for 14 years. Yet, when it came a couple of times, and of course, her misfortune was twice when she tried to raise money, was the downturn. One was the 2008 financial meltdown, then the bubble burst, all these things happened, right? So then, but her insight that, look, even though things are dimmed into your head that you need to care about a waterfall of proceeds, who owns what kind of equity, when you're running the business, you get into it so much, it's a matter of survival and growth, that you lose sight of some of these things. So it's not like, so go to business school, or again, by the way, I teach at a business school, so I'm not knocking business schools, right? But what I'm saying is, while we learn things, being able to draw on it when we need it and applying it is not easy. I mean, all of us know this. So these were things, I think the biggest thing is how amazingly people are prepared to share and how eager they are that we don't repeat the mistakes that they have made. I think that was the biggest surprise for me.
By one word I have to talk about, which got my attention,
Please.
is seller's remorse. Sellers are supposed to be very happy, no? What is this
Right.
seller's remorse?
So seller's remorse stems again from the inner game and the outer game we talked about, right?
Yeah.
So there are two kinds of exits that happen. One is a planned exit, right? Where you say, look, I do want to exit my business. So one of the stories I talked about, Tim McCarthy, he spent 5 years getting his business ready so that it'd be of value. He wanted to get 10 times earnings. He did get 9 times, right?
Well.
So it's planned. Yet, why was he miserable after he sold his business, right? So in his case, he had made some assumptions of what he would do after he exit his business. And one of the things he did was he decided to stay on the board because he believed in the business. He decided to take some money and stay on the board. He kept some stake and stayed on the board. But of course, the board immediately thought, look, this is the ex-entrepreneur. He's going to find everything. He's going to be unhappy with everything that happens. Whereas he felt, obviously, I'm committed to this. So, which means, even though intellectually he said, now I'll go travel the world, do things with my family, etc. And some of that he did do, but he stayed in the business, which was not the right decision for him. It may have been the right decision for somebody else at that point. Because as an entrepreneur, he built it from nothing to 5 million to 15 million, and he got it to 45 million when he sold the business. The people who are trying to take it from 45 million to a billion, unfortunately, they've never run a $45 million business. They run $1 billion business, right? So the things that they want. So even when you plan, something like this happens, where you make yourself, right? The more common one is many times people realize that, look, what really I enjoyed was the chase and the hunt. Roj, people were coming to me saying, hey, this needs to be done, that needs to be done, etc. The morning after the money's in the bank, I've already been, swimming or boating for 2 weeks, I'm back, right? Or maybe I traveled for 3 months. And my life's completely empty, as in no one comes to me, no one even calls me anymore. Yeah. In fact, the only calls I get are people who think I have money and maybe I can give them some of it. Right? So there again, they didn't really think through, what gave my life purpose. Yeah. Why was I was a much better person to be around because I was all of these things. That's one part. The unplanned part is, even in the unplanned, like the RT example I told you, sometimes it works out well. In RT's case, it was totally unplanned, where he felt, hey, that's it. I don't want to be doing this anymore. Overnight, right? And he realized what he wanted to be doing was teaching and mentoring and things like that. So even though he had debt left over, etc., he was very happy because he got what he wanted. Yeah. But the really sad part, and I've seen this in one of these startups that I've invested in itself, is sometimes unplanned things happen when the entrepreneur goes through a divorce, for example, right? It can get very messy suddenly, and on top of it, family owns part of your business, etc., and now you have to separate things. That's one kind of thing. Or the entrepreneur falls dead, right? That's happened as well many times. Right? And there's some research that suggests most startups within the first 7 years, if the entrepreneur drops dead for whatever reason, never really recovers. So while there is an exit, the third part is you get disabled, or most importantly, disenchanted. This has happened in 99. I don't know if you recall back then. You could put any noun.com and people would put a couple of $1 million, dogs.com, pets.com, what have you. So then when people were working in tech firms, like I was working in a tech firm, many of my peers felt, oh my God, are we missing out? We should get in that, right? And I think this is repeated in Bangalore as well. When people see, oh, wait a second, Ola is doing this, or, right? When lots of money is being invested in companies, people feel, hey, I should be as part of that action. But the reality is they don't realize what the slog is, etc. So when you get in there, now you're disillusioned, now you want to exit. It's an unplanned exit. You want to get out because you just can't take it anymore. Your wife or your spouse wants to know, hey, kya kar rahe ho? Or you're getting burnt out, what have you. So by the way, both in unplanned exits and planned exits, happy exits can happen. Yeah. But if they are planned, they're a little bit better. And when you plan in the manner in which I'm outlining in the book, which is really the story from these folks, so seller's remorse comes from being unprepared first. And unprepared is not for the sale alone. Unprepared as in, I don't know what I want. I don't know who I am. I don't know what turns me on. And sometimes, right, and this happened in our business sale was, the chartered accountants thought our business was worth between 0 rupees and minus 100 rupees, right? Because obviously, because a foreign buyer bought our business, we had to have it valuated by 2 different chartered accountants for Reserve Bank of India, which means the average share price was minus 50 rupees. But the buyer bought the company at 190 rupees per share, right? So many of our engineers had not vested, whose options had vested, they did not convert their options to shares. So what happened is, on the night of the sale, suddenly someone found out, wait a second, I'm going to make 20 lakh rupees. They were like, wow. Then they went, what do you mean I need to pay taxes on it? Because, because they did not already buy the options to be shares, a third of it went straight, 28%, 30% went straight as taxes, right? So then they go like, okay, now the next question was, what am I going to be doing? Never mind, money, they made money. And the fourth question they had was, wait a second, what is going to be my role, in this new thing? And are you going to give me, restricted shares? Are you going to give me more options? This new business that bought us. So what would have been a happy event, because they didn't truly understand what they wanted and they didn't prepare. They went through this emotion. I mean, what was worse is, one person went through this in 1 hour, one person went through this in 1 week, one person went through it over 1 month, which means 90 days after selling my business, all my time was spent talking to every one of these people, trying to walk them through this journey, which me as the entrepreneur, I should have done a much better job of setting expectations with my team. It's a matter of education. It's nothing. The amount of money they made was still, rather than getting negative, they all made sizable amounts of money, but they did not get the same joy from it, because I failed to educate myself and them. So these are the reasons that sellers remorse. Rarely is it about the money itself.
Yeah.
Right. So one last thing, I'm sorry, I should add here, because a shocking number of entrepreneurs who run large businesses are terrible at managing their own finances.
Yeah.
What that means is, so even though you made this $45 million, let's say, or 10 million or 2 million, whatever the number, it doesn't matter. What is your plan? If your plan is to retire, if you put that straight in government bonds at 3% a year, is that going to generate enough cash to pay for your daily living? And most people don't know the answer to this question.
Yeah.
Because many of their expenses, many times, are taken care of by the business. Many times they're not paying themselves, but obviously that's not going to be the state after they get out of here. Or they may be drawing large salaries from their businesses now, and they may not be able to pay themselves that from the interest that comes. Do they now plan to invest in other businesses? Do they intend to start another business? So again, it all comes down to knowing yourself and planning, which is really what causes seller's remorse. Because many times you feel rudderless and purposeless.
Why should they pick the book? And any advice, because you've donned so many hats. You've been a successful entrepreneur, you've been a successful investor, you've mentored so many startups, and now you're a professor, and you've lived in different geographies, that geography that we all look up to, and this geography, which is amazing and very cool now. So what would you like to tell entrepreneurs, and why should they pick your book?
It's very simple. To me, again, the key with a book like this is you get to hear from other entrepreneurs in an unvarnished way, entrepreneurs that you deem successful. That to me, that's the first reason you would pick up this book. The second is, I'd like to tie it back to another question you asked earlier: why these entrepreneurs? What is amazing about these entrepreneurs, and that's really the reason you should get this book, is it's very easy when you read in the papers. And again, both venture capitalists and the media see waves, and they tend to be somewhat cheap. No disrespect to present company, if you will, right? Which is either it's all tech or it's all home delivery, it's all B2C. This book looks at people who are in the advertising business. It looks at people who are in the marketing business. It looks at people, a pizzeria, which was sold to McDonald's, then bought back by the same entrepreneur and grown to the next level, right? So it represents both, and it represents people who were acquired and stayed in the acquiring company for 10 years after the acquisition. And then they exit and started other startups as well. These were serial entrepreneurs. So my intent was, what this will allow you to do is, it gives you not only the perspective of multiple geographies, but also the challenges that women entrepreneurs face that men entrepreneurs may or may not face. It also gives you a sense of, it doesn't really matter what the business is. So, while it's an overstatement that yes, people are people everywhere, the entrepreneurial journey many times is really a journey of self-discovery. And it's very easy when I say that, and it seems like, oh my God, what is this, right? But the reality is, when you see the lived story of these people, and the external world will deem them successful. Many of them, even though the world deems them successful, and obviously they are successful, really measure themselves by impact rather than the amount of money they made. So this is something that, again, I think we do young people a disfavor, but this is in every geography, when we constantly harp on money raised or exit done in terms of money done. But the reality is, what is happiness? Know thyself. That's the heart of what this is. but told from an entrepreneurial perspective by other entrepreneurs, right? While I do talk and I do show up in the book occasionally, I try to keep it in the voice of the other entrepreneurs. And that makes it, again, I hate reading a book which is on and on about do this, do that, the other thing. But all of us like reading stories. That's the reason you should get this book, because these are fun stories of an amazing array of people.
Thank you so much, Krishna. We are very thankful that you took the effort to write this book. This will be very useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shradha. I appreciate your making the time.